Rewritten opening, 30 seconds. You've likely spent $10,000 plus on vacations exploring ancient ruins, yet archaeologists still can't explain structures far older than they should exist. In 1986, a diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake discovered a massive platform 25 meters down off Japan's coast, carved with perfect terraces and right angles from solid bedrock. The problem, your history books say this technology shouldn't have been possible for another 1,000 years. So how did it get there? Nearly 40 years, archaeologists have been unable to answer the one question that matters. So what are they actually looking at down there, and why won't the official record commit to an answer? Terraces. Right angles. A flat-topped platform the size of a city block, carved, or at least shaped, from solid bedrock. No coral colony builds like that. No tidal current carves a staircase. Aratake surfaced and reported what he'd found. And for nearly 40 years since, the argument about what lies on the ocean floor beneath Yonaguni has never fully resolved. Here's the question the official records still can't answer. If those terraces are man-made, they were built when that seafloor was dry land, which means they predate every civilization we say could have built them by thousands of years. Let me give you the geography first, because it matters. Yonaguni sits at the far western edge of the Ryukyu island chain. The monument itself, that's the name researchers gave it, rests on a submarine terrace at depths between 5 and 25 meters. It stretches roughly 150 meters east to west and 40 meters north to south. The main feature is a stepped pyramid shape rising from the ocean floor, its top surface almost flat, its edges defined by clean vertical drops. What first drew serious academic attention was a man named Masaroki Kimura. He was a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, and he didn't just look at the structure once. He dived it repeatedly for 15 years. He catalogued and mapped. And what he published wasn't vague. He identified what he described as a stone stage, a triangular pool, 2 parallel monoliths standing upright, a low wall, and a feature that appeared to function as a road running along the main terrace's southern face. Kimura argued the structure was man-made. He pointed to tool marks. He pointed to angles that natural erosion in sandstone doesn't typically produce. He pointed to the arrangement of features as spatially intentional, not random fracture. The geological counterargument, made most forcefully by Robert Schoch of Boston University, who had already made waves challenging the age of the Sphinx, was careful and worth hearing. Schoch argued the Yonaguni structure is natural. He said the sandstone in that region fractures along horizontal and vertical joints, producing exactly the kind of flat surfaces and right angles Kimura was cataloguing. He dived the site himself. He concluded the ocean had simply sculpted what looked, from a human perspective, like architecture. And that's where the official debate has sat, more or less, ever since. But here's what the natural formation argument doesn't fully account for, and this is where I'd ask you to hold your conclusion for just a moment longer. In the records I've kept on disputed ancient sites, Yonaguni is unusual for one specific reason. Most sites that draw fringe attention are ambiguous in their features. Yonaguni is not. The dispute isn't about whether the shapes exist. Everyone who has dived it agrees they exist. The dispute is purely about cause. And that distinction matters enormously. Because if the cause is human, then the implications don't stop at one island. The last major sea level rise, the one that followed the end of the last ice age, occurred roughly between 12,000 and 8,000 BCE. At its peak, sea levels globally rose by as much as 120 meters. Coastlines that were dry land for tens of thousands of years went underwater permanently. Entire regions that may have supported human communities simply ceased to exist above the surface. The Yonaguni site, at its current depth, would have been above water during that period. If people built on it, they were building during or before the Ice Age's end. That places potential construction somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 BCE. Possibly earlier. For reference, Göbekli Tepe, the oldest confirmed complex stone structure on Earth, dates to approximately 9,600 BCE. And Göbekli Tepe shocked the archaeological world when it was discovered because it pushed back the assumed timeline of organized construction by thousands of years. Yonaguni, if man-made, would sit in that same window. Maybe older. Now, here is where the record gets genuinely complicated. And I want you to stay with this for the next 2 minutes, because 3 pieces of evidence I'm about to walk through each suggest something different about what kind of site this might be, and the third one changes the question entirely. The first piece is the so-called turtle feature. Near the main step platform, divers have documented a large stone that bears a resemblance to a turtle shape, not a vague one, but a specific carved outline that Kimura and his team argued showed intentional shaping. Skeptics noted that pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful shapes in random forms, is a well-documented problem in underwater archaeology. Fair point. But Kimura's team also documented what appeared to be smaller, clearly incised lines that don't correspond to natural fracture patterns. The second piece is harder to dismiss. Embedded in sediment near the base of the main terrace, researchers recovered stone tools. Not sophisticated ones, basic cutting and scraping implements. But tools, nonetheless, in proximity to the structure. That doesn't prove construction. It proves human presence in the area when it was above water. Which is exactly what a man-made structure would predict. The third piece is what I find most quietly significant, and it was almost overlooked entirely. A researcher examining Kimura's original survey notes that hadn't been widely circulated outside Japanese academic publications, found references to what Kimura described as recurring geometric markings on several vertical faces of the monument. Not carvings of figures or animals. Systematic, repeating angular cuts. The kind of marks that in other contexts, at Göbekli Tepe, at Puma Punku, have been interpreted as measurement systems or structural guides. Kimura mentioned them in the early 1990s. Then, in the most cited versions of his later work, those specific markings received almost no discussion. Few who asked why got a clear answer. I'm not suggesting suppression. What I am suggesting is that the Yonaguni record is genuinely incomplete, not because of conspiracy, but because of a more ordinary problem. The site is underwater, it's expensive and difficult to survey systematically, and the academic cost of being wrong about it has made many researchers cautious to the point of silence. What we know with certainty is this. The structure exists. It is geometric. It sits on a shelf that was dry land between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago. Stone tools have been found in its vicinity. And one of the most credentialed researchers to spend serious time on it spent 15 years arguing it was built. What we cannot yet say with certainty is by whom, or exactly when, or what it was used for. But here's what I keep returning to. In the records I've kept on this, the natural formation argument explains the shapes. It doesn't explain the tools. It doesn't explain the markings Kimura noted and then stopped discussing. And it doesn't explain why a sandstone shelf, fractured by natural forces, would produce a raised platform with a flat summit, flanked by what appear to be deliberate approach routes from the south. Nature is capable of extraordinary mimicry. But it rarely mimics intention from multiple angles simultaneously. The seafloor off Yonaguni-jima is not giving up its answer easily. The site is still dived. It is still debated. Kimura continued publishing until late in his career, never recanting his conclusion. Schock maintained his. The journal literature is inconclusive. And somewhere beneath the cold Pacific, those terraces sit exactly as they have for thousands of years, whether human hands shaped them or not, older than most of what we call civilization, waiting for a methodology careful enough to settle the question. What the archivist can tell you is this: the absence of an answer is not the same as the absence of evidence. The record on Yonaguni is unfinished. And unfinished records, in my experience, are always worth watching. If this is the kind of document you want to keep reading, subscribe. There are more of them.